Welcome everybody, and it's great to have you all here today for our seed gathering masterclass for schools. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat, and there'll be time to answer the questions later. So I'm Juliet, and I'm the National Schools Programme Officer at the Tree Council. We've also got John Stokes, who we'll introduce a little bit more in a bit, and Richard, who's the National Schools Programme Manager. So I'll hand over to Richard.
Hi, really lovely to see you all today. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, a broader, exciting webinar we've got planned for you. We've got the expert in the country when it comes to seed gathering, and his knowledge of trees is stupendous. So I'm hoping you're going to enjoy this as much as we are. And yeah, relax, try and get over the stresses of the day, and have at least an hour or so. We may be finished before then on this session of seed gathering and why it's so important to do it. So yeah, next slide please. Yeah, so the webinar we're going to be covering today, of course, is a little bit of overview from me from National Schools Programme, why gathering seeds is so important, seeds and tree biology, how to collect your seeds when you're out on the weekends during the seed gathering season, and how to process your seeds, practical tips on planning your seed gathering lesson and ideas for follow-up activities, and of course Force for Nature Tree Seed Totalizer, which is our website now. So any seeds that you do gather, make sure you get them up onto our totalizer, and we can see just how many schools across the UK are collecting seeds this seed season. That's a tongue tickler. And what's coming up this autumn, of course, we're going to showcase some of the events that are coming up this autumn, just to pique your interest and keep you on board as we go through the autumn term. And there will be lots of opportunities, of course, to ask lots of questions. So please use the Q&A function and the chat function as we go through. You are on mute, and there are lots of us, so it's really best that we keep to mute at the moment. But yeah, please use those two functions throughout. Fantastic, thanks. Tree Council, the organisation's growing all the time, literally, not in just staff, but also in the numbers of trees that we're planting in schools. There's 7.5 million trees have been planted, 30,000 trees planted this last year alone in our schools, and we have almost coming up to over 2,500 schools involved in the Tree Council National Schools Programme, which is incredible, and that growth has happened just in the last 9 months, so quite amazing really. And 30 million tree warden volunteer hours, and that's part of the Tree Warden Network. But we are an organisation that really focuses on the tree health, and we're an advisor for DEFRA as well. We're not alone. We have lots of support from partners, Eco Schools being one of our major partners, and also Forest Schools Association, Teach the Future, Derby University do our impact assessment work for us, research on the nature connectedness department, and Speakers Trust help us find the voice, really, in encouraging children in schools to find their voice, and teachers to speak up about the crisis and why it's so important to them. And there's others that we are working with as well. So you're very much in good hands. The National Schools Programme has two main programs within it, and that is the Orchards for Schools, which we have over thousands of schools involved in Orchards for Schools, and Young Tree Champions Programme, which is a very high impact programme, helping children develop and teachers. So a suite of training opportunities for teachers, and extensive resource packs and website and hub spaces, and for teachers to share their expertise online, and competitions and all sorts of things around the Young Tree Champion Programme. And we have the Ambassador Programme, which is a new programme for us, where we have young ambassadors, real inspiring young individuals that have a real passion for trees and for the natural world and for tackling the crisis, and they're helping more and more in schools this coming year, so look out for them. Why is it so important? Well, our role as the National Schools Programme, of course, is to meet the needs of young people and children and teachers in schools. So anxiety, you call it climate anxiety, it's prevalent and it's growing all the time. And so the program is a really great opportunity to help schools connect with each other, and for teachers to connect, and for children to connect, not with just each other as friends, but also with nature. And it's proven through the research that that's really starting to help children reduce those anxieties that they may have, draw a lot of strength from nature, and improvements in their health and well-being, of course. And there is a knowledge gap. There's another challenge that we face as more and more research is done around the crisis and around the science behind trees. Our role is very much to filter that knowledge and experience and skills into schools, going down through the school system, from college down to secondary, down into primary, and make sure that you're receiving the best knowledge possible, and the best research that's coming through. And young people have such a passion for nature, and children in schools, all the schools that we've been into, it's just really remarkable and fantastic to hear. So much passion, so much determination to make a difference. And just some stats there, but just to show, 89% of young people really do feel they can make a difference regarding the crisis. So it's our role is to create that platform, to give them the voice, to give them the skills and expertise and confidence to speak up about trees and about nature and the crisis. So that's what we do. And yeah, just so I'm just sort of explaining those points around the mental health crisis and the skills knowledge gap and the equality that exists, where the big decisions being made about the future are often not made by young people. So we really want to give them that vehicle, that opportunity to speak up and to influence the decision makers. So this is all about seed gathering. And I've spoken enough, and I'm going to hand over now to John Stokes, our Director of Science and Research.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this workshop. We're going to talk about how to grow trees from seed, because, as Richard and Juliet have told me, it's a great activity for schools. And at the end of the presentation, Juliet is going to talk through some of the practicalities of doing this in a classroom, or some of the things that you might be able to take. But we're going to do a little bit about trees and seed, and about how to collect them and grow them in the school. And I'm sitting outside in my garden in Hampshire with a tray full of seeds to show you, to talk about. If the rain suddenly comes in, there might be a momentary lapse of signal. Let's pray for good weather for the next half an hour, and then we'll be good. So as Richard has said, this is seed gathering season. Seed gathering season is when we focus around the idea of setting up and growing new trees from seed, because obviously trees are designed to grow from seed. They produce millions and millions of them, but not all of those turn into trees. So what we can do by gathering that seed is to help a little bit, to give those young seedlings the chance to establish and to grow. And it's a great thing to do with children, is to actually just take a conker and actually grow a tree from it, and then suddenly the whole thing starts to make sense. So what we're going to do is talk through some of the principles, some of the practice, and hopefully show you some of the things that you can do so that you can help, to grow the next generation of trees for your treescape in your schools and communities, and even free trees for your own school grounds. So fundamentally, it all starts with a seed. And seeds may seem different, but they are fundamentally the same thing. There is a little baby dormant tree, the embryo contained in the seed. Then there's a coat around the seed, and there's a food store. And they all differ. So some have hard cases, and some have fleshy fruit around them. And we'll talk about some of this in a minute. But each one differs in appearance, but they are fundamentally the same thing: a dormant embryo, a seed coat, and a store of food to get the young tree started. And to try and make it work, to try and make it explicable, we've divided seeds up into 4 broad groups. And we're going to talk about these in more detail in a minute. But broadly speaking, there are cones, trees that come from the seed from a cone. There are nuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, Brazil nuts, and we classify things like acorns from oaks as nuts. There are winged seeds, seeds that have wings to help them disperse across through the air. What as a kid I used to call a helicopter, and fleshy fruits, things with berries, even up to apples and oranges and lemons. These are all trees with seed that has flesh around them. And when you can start to put a seed into one of these four categories, from then on, it becomes really easy to grow a tree from seed. You just need to know the right process to do to those four different types of seed. And we're going to show you that in a minute. To help, there's a guide that's on our website, or Richard and Juliet will circulate afterwards to explain how to grow trees from seed, but also what seeds are, what the species are that you might see when you're out looking. And we've produced some seed spotting guidance. We've produced some guidance on what you do when you've gathered them. All sorts of stuff. It will be circulated after this to help you. And Juliet was probably going to pick up on that at the end of the session. But fundamentally, where you've got to start is, where are you going to plant your tree? The truth is, it is extremely easy to grow a horse chestnut from a conker. It's really simple when you get down to it. This thing wants to grow into a tree, and it will do. But if you have a class of 30 children and they all grow successfully 30 horse chestnut trees, what are you going to do with them? Because you don't want the kids to be disappointed. So you can send them home and try and get them to plant them in their gardens. But in many cases, what you can do with them is think about putting them in your school grounds. So ideally, what you want to grow is a tree that is suitable for your school grounds. So find the tree that you want and then collect its seed, because that way you can ensure that you're growing something that has a purpose. There are all sorts of other things you can do with them, and it will take you 3 or 4 years to get your tree to a state where you're ready to grow it, to plant it out. So you get a chance to work with other community projects locally, but you need to have thought, what am I growing these trees for? And then you need to think about how to collect them. Sorry. The confusions of mobile phones linked to laptops. I apologize for that. It was my daughter phoning from her first day at university, wondering if she could talk to her dad. And the answer is no. So what we need to do is think about the act of collecting. Now, obviously, if you're collecting seed, there are some basic health and safety tips, especially if you're working with children. You want them to collect from the ground. They don't want to be climbing trees. They don't want to be up ladders, nor do you. Many tree seeds can be collected from the tree from a standing position. You can also collect them off the ground, but obviously if you're collecting them off the ground with children, you need to be careful about what animals may have left things in the school grounds or wherever you're in the park, and just avoid children picking things up without having thought. And then when you've collected them, you need to think about just washing hands afterwards. There are very few seeds that are actively poisonous. Yew is one, although the red fleshy fruit around a yew is actually not poisonous. But the simple rule is they should never eat anything. So never, actively discourage any of the children from looking at the seed as something they can pop in their mouths. And fundamentally, other than that, it's just common sense. It's just not doing it on very windy days, not exploring in too heavy rain, all the basic health and safety stuff that you would do in a school normally. So collecting the seed is actually quite simple, but it's not always there. And thinking about what you might get the children to find is important, because it depends on what is in your school grounds, what is in your local park, what is in your woods. And there will be a number of factors at play then. What happened in the spring? If you get a spring frost, then certain of the trees don't produce seed because the flowers came out too early, or it so happened that The bees didn't appear at the right time. There are trees where both sexes of flowers, the male and female flowers, are on one tree. They're called monoecious trees. That means that every tree theoretically could produce seed. But there are also trees called dioecious trees, where you need to have a male and a female. They're different trees. And the classic case in point of that is yew or holly. And in those circumstances, you might be looking at a male tree and it may never produce berries. So you need to find a tree that obviously has fruit, a female tree. And you need to be aware of things called mast years. This year is a mast year, or last year was a mast year, which means that certain species, particularly things like oak, have these sort of boom and bust years where they produce a mass of seed, which they did last year with oaks. This year, there are no acorns in the countryside. So it is not the same each year. You can't go to an oak tree and expect every year that there will be acorns, because one in every 7 or 8 years, there will be nothing. And then in the year before, there will have been millions and millions of them. So you just need to understand that you need to look, you need to be aware of what's going on out there, and you need to collect the appropriate seeds. But with all of those bits and pieces in place, it then becomes a really, really simple and good fun exercise to engage people with growing trees from seed. So what we're going to do now is we're going to explore my table of things that we've got here. And Juliet, where would you like to start?
Can we start with nuts? And first of all, can you show us some of the nuts and tell us the trees that they will have come from?
So nuts are what they say on the tin, and you'll be familiar with walnuts and Brazil nuts. This is a horse chestnut. You get acorns. We classify them as nuts. You get things like hazelnuts, so there are a whole range of nuts out there in the countryside to go and collect. Sweet chestnut, which come in these prickly little seed balls. Always entertaining to tell people who haven't thought of it that baby hedgehogs come from here, and then explain that that's not quite true. But so there are lots of nuts, and they've usually got some sort of protective shell because they're packed with food. So if you're an animal like a squirrel, this is really, really good food. So as a tree, you defend yourself with something spiky like a horse, like this sweet chestnut, or like this seed casing from a horse chestnut that is designed. And obviously when you're with children, you have to be careful that if they pick them up, they're not hurting themselves with the spines. And then the idea is you need to get the nut out of the often spiky case, and you will then get a handful of acorns, a handful of nuts of all sorts. I have got on my table here somewhere some. I've now got to find them because the wind has blown them. I have some acorns from a different tree. These are from not an English oak. These are from a holm oak. And you see the little acorn sits in a cup. It's true of all acorns. And with these, what you have to do is to separate the cup from the acorn. This bit has no value to the growing of the tree. It has to the tree, but not to the growing. This is the bit you want the acorn. And so what you then do is you separate out your acorns, you separate out your horse chestnuts and any other nuts that you get. And then you need the highly technical piece of equipment, a bowl of water. And with a highly technical bowl of water, you just chuck them all in. Yeah. And what will then happen is those that sink, and as it happens, every single one of those has sunk. Anything that sinks will grow and will produce a young tree if you get the next bits right. So every one of those is viable. If they float, and none of those floated, and whenever you work with children, animals, and tree seeds, it never does quite what you expect. Everything has sunk. But in a batch of acorns in any given year, you might get 50 or 60% of them that are no good. And literally just chucking them in a bucket of water, a bowl of water, will be able to sort out all those that don't And we did once do 1,000 acorns, and of the 1,000, there were only 12 that were viable. Only 12 sank. So it's a really good way of just testing which ones are good and which ones aren't. Simple as that. So that's how you deal with nuts.
And in the wild, naturally,
yeah.
How would nuts be dispersed?
They would be dispersed by squirrels. The squirrels are extraordinarily good at it. And other animals that are out there, they're extraordinarily good. They gather up the seed and they bury it. And in my garden here, the squirrels have a field day with the hazel that's in the hedge behind. And my garden is full of baby hazels, literally full of baby hazels that the squirrels get to plant long before I do. They are fantastic at collecting them. They are really, really lousy at remembering where they've planted them. And about 50% of them then sprout into trees. So they do the tree's job. They disperse and plant for the tree.
Okay, shall we do fruits now? Fleshy fruits?
Yeah, fleshy fruits. So fleshy fruits, everything from a plum. So this is a wild plum. These are white bean berries. These are the berries of a rowan, and even things like apples. Bigger apples, that's a crab apple, a bigger conventional apple. All of this fruit is designed to get the birds to disperse, or the other animals to disperse the seed. They are there to attract something to eat it. But contained within each of these fruits is a seed. And what you have to do is you have to get the seed out of the fruit, because there are chemicals in this fruit that are designed to stop it from germinating. So what you have to do is get the little tiny seeds out of these fruits, and they're the things that you plant. If you plant these berries, it will not happen, because the natural inhibition that exists in this berry means that it doesn't work. So the way to deal with these is we get our trusty bowl of water. We take out the acorns and the nuts that we've just put in there. And we take our berries and we chuck them in some water. They will all sink. And then another highly technical bit of kit, a potato masher. And then what you do with the seeds on the bottom is just mash them up a bit. I can't quite show you that on screen, but trust me, I'm just mashing them up a bit. And what then happens, unfortunately, I left a few acorns in there, which means acorns don't mash quite so well. But what happens as you mash it up is that the seed breaks up, the berry breaks up, sorry, and out will float these little tiny seeds. And hopefully you can see on the end of my finger there, on the end of my thumb, there's a little tiny black seed. And in each of these berries, there was 2 or 3 of these little tiny black seeds. And the best way to get them out is to mash it up a bit. They will float to the surface. And these, doesn't matter if they float, these are, you want them floating. So on the surface of the water there's about half a dozen of these seeds. And this is the bit that goes to the next part of the process. So the acorns that sink, the little tiny seeds that float, we'll talk to you about the next bit of the process in a second. But both of those require a bowl of water.
And so many of those berries are red. What's the reason behind so many of the berries being beautiful red colour?
They are a beautiful red colour because the birds, they are designed to be eaten by something. So they are designed to be eaten by a bird, and the bird will come along. Birds love red. So birds come along, eat the berries, fly away, and in the stomach of the bird, the stomach acids strip off this fruit, like me mashing it in the bowl. They strip off the fruit, and then they fly away. They drop stuff out of their guts, and that little bit of bird droppings that happens will contain the seeds, and they have a little bit of fertilizer that comes with them. So that's the head start that the seed needs to get started. All we're doing with the potato masher is simulating the bird's stomach. We're just removing the flesh to get to the seed within.
Okay, brilliant. Let's do cones next. Are you ready for cones?
Cones are complicated because cones take time. They're really simple to do if you get it right. They're really not if you don't. So cones start, a cone like this can take 5 to 6 to 7 years to ripen. They start green, they become brown, and then gradually they become browner, and they then start to develop to a place where they can produce the seed. But when they're in this state, it is almost impossible. Inside this cone, these are called cone scales, these bits, and they're really hard. And inside those are the little tiny seeds that you need. And it is almost impossible to break them open with your fingers. So the thing to do is to look for cones like this one that are just starting to open. Can you see the way that's starting to split out? That means it's now ripe. And if you then put that cone in a bag, in a paper bag or a plastic bag, just pop it in a bag, take it indoors and keep it in the dry, in the warm, then what will happen is that will expand in the warmth and the seeds will drop out into the bag. But that may take, once they get to this stage where they're starting to open, that may still take another 3 months. If you get one that's really sealed up like this, it's not quite ripe at all, it might take 4 or 5 years, or you may never get the seeds out. So find them as they're opening, put them in a bag, and leave them near the fire, on the windowsill, somewhere warm, in the airing cupboard, anywhere where you've got the option that it'll just dry out and the seeds will pop out. And I have a very special one here. This is my last one of the year. This is a noble fir, which is a very unique type of seed, very unique type of cone. Because this one is really delicate, and unlike these, which are like rock, this one's really soft. And once I start doing this one, it will just collapse, because what happens is the seeds come out like so. They just break off, and suddenly you can get access to the seeds. And these are what are contained within every. So this is a seed of a nut of a cone tree, pine tree. It's a little tiny thing, little tiny wing that's designed to help that seed to flutter to the ground. And then the seed bit is this tiny bit here. Not all of this, just this tiny bit at the bottom, just there. Really, really small. But cones, you need a bit of time and a bit of patience, and you won't be able to collect and process them in the same day that you're doing the school exercise. So it just requires a bit of planning, but it's a good thing to do just before Christmas. Collect them now, shake them out at Christmas, and then they're ready to go for the next batch.
Okay, so our final seeds are winged seeds.
And winged seeds are the easiest of all. Winged seeds are things like this. Oh, there's a quadruple on there. That's very unusual. Winged seeds are like this. They have wings, as it says on the. And what happens is that they've designed to float off the tree. The little wings help the seed disperse. These can travel for 20 or 30 kilometers with these if they get the right wind. But the important part is with winged seeds, they're usually in pairs, like this one. You just break them in half. Because they want to split. There's an inhibition that stops them from growing while they're together. Split them in half, break off the wing. Remember which way was where the wing was, and then that is the bit you're after. That's the bit that you plant or you take to the next stage of the process. And what we've talked about is how you process these, but maybe we'll talk in a second about the next part of the process. But bowl of water, float them for acorns and nuts, mash them for berries, dry them for cones, and just break them in half for winged seeds. And then you have the bit you need, the seed, which is the next part of the process. And
do you remember how far the furthest a winged seed can travel?
It's about 30 or 40 kilometers is the furthest they've been recorded. So it can travel, really long distances, but most of them only travel 500 yards because it depends on the height of the tree, and they drop off and blow away. But if they get caught in an updraft, they can go for miles and miles and miles.
A great experiment as well to do with your students.
Yeah. Just take handfuls and see how far you can get them to fly in the wind. It's always good fun.
So we'll start the next process, but remember, if you have any questions, just feel free to put them in the Q&A and the chat, and then we can go back to them in question time. So what's next? So we've processed our seeds.
So you've processed your seed. You now have your seeds. You now have your viable conkers, or your berries, or your nuts, or your wing seeds. And what you now need to do is you now need to help the seed to get through the winter. And what we're trying to do with this is we do something. The technical word is stratification, but it's really getting the seed through the winter. And what you then want is some pots. And in this pot, what you want to do is mix together some compost, peat-free compost. You want some sand, and you want some grit or stones. And you can see in this pot, there's a mixture of soil, sand, and a bit of compost. And that's designed to retain a little bit of moisture. That's what the sand and the soil, sand and the compost do. The stones are there to let it drain through a bit so that the pot doesn't get too wet, doesn't stand in water all winter. And mix up these thirds, so a third of each, third sand, third compost, third stones, mix them together. And then you have this lovely thing called a stratification medium, which is this. And what you then do is, as I've already done in this pot, you mix in some seed. And you can mix in as much as you can get in. It is not where they're going to end up being. You just mix them together. Take as many seeds as you can pack into the pot and put them in there. It is not where they're going to grow. It is just about keeping them through the winter and behaving as though this is winter. And what you need to do is then get a piece of wire mesh or a brick, cover the top of your pot, because all you're going to do then is store that pot with all the seeds through the winter so that they sit there safe, ideally safe from squirrels and other things that might come along and try to eat them. And the reason they need to sit there is that what happens in winter is that the seed gets cold, and tree seeds need a period of cold, the winter, to start them going. But the best part about this is that then in the spring, in March, you can then get the kids, you pour out this stratification medium onto a table and you look for those that are starting to germinate. And that usually happens at about the end of March, beginning of April. What will then happen is in this pot, they will start to produce little roots that appear out of the, I can't show you anyway because it's September, but little roots start to appear. And what you then do is you pick out the ones from the mass on the table, all the ones that are appearing to have little roots, and we move to the next part of the process. And everything else, you just put back in the pot and leave it for another week. And then next week you check again, throughout April. And if it hasn't germinated by the end of April, leave it and then come back to it next year, because sometimes they take 2 winters to germinate. It's just they need two periods of cold. So you can leave the pot and you can come back to it next year. But all those that then grow little roots, then you get another pot with some soil in, and just put the little seedlings into that soil, plant them about basically you plant the seed as deep as it is big. So if you've got an acorn or a conker which is big, you plant it that deep in the soil. And if you've got a little tiny seed, you literally just put it on the surface and cover up with a touch of soil. But basically, as big as it is, plant it deep into that pot, and then you're on your way to growing your first batch of trees. And these are 2 wild plums that I've grown from plums. I had a damson here a minute ago. It seems to have disappeared. Where's it gone? There you go. So obviously, if you're collecting seed at the moment for jam, collecting damsons or something, inside there will be some lovely seeds. And you can then, as this one here, you can get the seeds out. So I've just dropped it. There's a damson seed. What you then do is you just store that over winter, stratify it, put it in a pot if it starts to grow, and up will appear your little trees. You then have to look after them through the summer or through the year. And as they grow in the pots, keep them outside, keep them somewhere relatively out of direct sunlight, and keep them watered. And the little trees will come up in the first year. And then by the second year, you will start to get into things of this type. These are 2-year-old trees. And these 2-year-old trees are now getting to the place where you can plant them out. So these are now, as you can see, 12 inches tall. And these are now perfect for planting out. What you can do is you can, during the course of the year, if they're growing too well, you can check how the roots are doing. And if the soil is still dark, then everything's good. If the pot starts to get lots and lots of roots around the outside, then it's time to move them to a bigger pot. But if they look like this, that's perfectly healthy. And then ideally you get to a stage like these little trees where there are lots of really healthy looking roots. You can see all the really healthy looking roots. I did this for a demonstration last week, so this is why they're slightly falling to pieces. But you can then break those trees up into the individual trees. You can see all the little roots that are on there. And that is now ready to plant out. It's a nice little hazel tree, just waiting to grow. It's 2 years old. It's not taken it, zero expense to get here. And that's the point. Once you've got this little tree, you can then plant that out in your school grounds, in your community project that you've identified. And the kids can feel, engaged with the process because they've grown it. This is theirs. This is something that they've taken from a seed and looked after and created. And all of that means that trees are potentially free. You don't need to buy them. You set up a process like this where you do this every year and you can grow your own trees from seed for free. And suddenly you can grow as many as you're capable of as a school, as a community, because it's not complicated. It just requires a bit of patience, a bit of care, and a bit of knowledge. And hopefully we've given you all of those. Particularly we've given you the bit of knowledge. And I think we're going to open to questions now. Is that right, Juliet?
Yeah, we're going to open to questions. So we'll do about 10 minutes of Q&A. So we've got a question here about why do the good ones sink? So with the nuts, why do the good ones sink to the bottom?
Because basically what's happening is air develops and other chemicals develop in bad seed, and they just rot. And that rotting chemical mixture that goes on inside the seeds creates buoyancy, and the buoyancy floats the seed to the top of the water. It's like eggs. When we were kids, you put eggs in a bowl of water. Before we had stamps on them that said eat by the 16th of September, you used to float them in a bowl of water, and if the egg floated to the surface, you didn't eat it. It's the same thing. They just go rotten, and that rotten creates chemicals which cause them to float.
And somebody's asking about, do you need to store them outside for winter? So when you've stratified them?
Yeah.
Yes, ideally. And there is another way of doing it. Once you've processed your seeds, you can put them in the freezer, and they can be stored in the freezer till the spring, and then bring them out in about February and start to pot them out in February. But yes, if you're going to stratify it properly in a pot or in buckets, or buckets are even better because you can get so much more in there, then yes, they should be stored outside somewhere not in direct sunlight and not in a place that will flood with water. So don't store them under the main drain of the school so that they're really, really wet, because what you want is you want them to be damp but not saturated. If they're saturated, all the seeds will rot and you won't get anything.
So the pot needs to have holes at the bottom as well.
Pot needs to have holes at the bottom, and it needs to be free draining. That's why you get the grit and the sand. And somebody said, what mixture do we put in? So basically 1/3 soil, 1/3 sand, 1/3 pebbles or grit or any other sort of stones that you can find, just to help the drainage in the pot. all of this information is in the guidance notes that we're going to send you following this, so that you've got it in writing. But it really is simple. It's not a complicated mixture. It's just anything that freely drains and a bit of soil, basically.
And a very good question. Do we need to protect the seeds from squirrels?
Yes, you do. And unfortunately, the wind's blown my prop away. So I'm just going to grab my prop. It is really quite windy out here at the moment. So here's one I prepared earlier. And this is just a bit of chicken wire. And so what we've done is we've got some chicken wire we can put over the top of the pot. And if you want to be absolutely certain, you put a brick on your chicken wire, and then they can't get in. What that means is that that's now secure for the winter, and we can store that anywhere. And obviously, if you've got lots of pots, the chicken wire you can spread out over, over a bigger area of pots.
No, there's no such thing as a silly question. Don't worry, Kirsten. So children that are allergic to nuts, are the tree nuts the same?
So there's a really good question in there. And if I'm honest, I don't want to say something that may be wrong. We have a lot of concern about nuts and about allergies. And my brother-in-law is really allergic to nuts. So we're very careful about it. Things like acorns technically aren't nuts. They are just treated in the same way as a nut. So therefore, you can do you can do acorns. I am not aware, but that does not mean it is an absolute fact of the fact that you can get contact poison from touching a seed or an allergic reaction to touching a seed. But I think if you've got children in the school which have known allergies, particularly to nuts, it will probably be better to avoid them doing that part of the process. But it's a really, really good question, and I don't honestly know the answer. So I think we need to do a school risk assessment on that. Yeah. Maybe we'll look it up and try and get you an answer afterwards.
And definitely just avoid it. If they have allergies to nuts, maybe don't process any nuts in your classes. And again, with the health and safety, just make sure you're washing hands, no hands near mouth, things like that you practice normally anyway.
There's one from
Emily. I will look that up and try and find out a question for you, which we'll circulate round afterwards if we get an answer.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. This is a question from Emily. So fascinating and entertaining. Thank you. Kids are going to love smashing those rowan berries. Any tips or tricks, I should say, for aspen seed?
Oh, now that's a really, really good question. Aspen and all the willows are really quite difficult because they produce fluffy, light seed that is blown away in the wind, and it is quite complicated to get that to grow. But scattering it on the surface of a damp soil usually does get it to germinate, but it requires a lot of moisture. They do need wet conditions. So more often than not, willows, aspens, and poplars are grown by clones. And the simple way of doing that is that you take, I haven't got one to hand, unfortunately, but you take a 12-inch length of a branch. So cut a bit of branch off, 12 inches long, about the size of a ruler, and strip off all the leaves except the ones at the top. If you've got some, dip the end of the branch in some rooting powder, and then stick it in a bucket of sand or wet sand or a sand soil mixture. We've been experimenting with this to see when you can do it, and it turns out that we've managed to get branches growing roots in every month from March till October, and starting the process off by just doing it literally there and then. And within 3 weeks they start to produce little roots, and those little roots, so you bury 11 inches of the 12 into the soil, and then amazingly they start to grow roots. And then once they've grown, They'll grow roots quite the way up and down the twig, and then that little tree will be good to grow. And we do take cuttings. It's a really easy process. We haven't covered it properly today, but do try it. Do see if you can get cuttings. And sometimes just take a branch and stick it in the soil where you want it to go, and it will go. They are remarkably good at growing from nothing. But aspen from seed is an interestingly. I wonder if you're in Scotland. Let me know if you're in Scotland, because Scotland is where aspen is at its most prolific, and nobody, to my knowledge, nobody's ever seriously tried it. So it would be really good to try. So if you want to give it a go next spring, because obviously the seed is only there in the spring. Give it a go in the spring, and let me know, because I would really love to know if it works. Yeah.
Another one here. Is there somewhere people can go to find a list of how big the trees grow and what their seeds look like?
Yes. So a lot of that is contained in the information that we're going to send you afterwards. There's lots of information on Tree Council website on what species grow and how big they get. So I can see comments appearing in the chat, and I've got distracted by Fiona saying that yes, she's planted aspen in the community, which is fantastic. I love aspen. It's one of the most disregarded. And again, Joanne said just sticking willow sticks in the ground and up they pop. It is a really easy way of getting a young tree, and you can do that now. You don't have to wait. You can do the twigs and sticks straight away. You don't have to wait for the spring for the seed. But if you're going to try the seed bit, yeah, I'd be really interested to know, because I'm not sure I've heard of anybody who's done that in a studied way. It would be great to get the kids to actually try it, experiment, and see what we come up with. If you want to do that, whoever asked the question, come back to me and we'll work out a little project that you could try with the kids for next spring, and we'll see what happens, because I think that would actually be genuinely scientifically quite interesting.
Yeah,
I'd love to try that.
And share your photos on social media with the hashtag Force Nature so that we can all see. There's one final question.
I would love to try that.
Before we move on a little bit. There will be more time for questions at the end if you have any others that pop up. So Tara asks, what's the recommended spacing distance when you plant the trees into the ground?
So that depends, Tara, what you're trying to achieve. And it depends what sort of thing you're trying to grow. So if you're going to put them, for example, if you've collected hawthorn seeds and you wanted to grow a hedge, then a hedge you can plant with one tree, one little hawthorn tree, within a metre length, you would put 6. So you would actually put lots in a very small space to grow a dense hedge. If you're planting hazels, you'd plant them at sort of 3 meters, 4 meters apart because you're trying to create a little woodland. If you're planting a great big oak tree, you would aim to have it on its own somewhere where it will grow and establish into, to become large. So the answer to the spacing question depends entirely on what you're trying to achieve. Again, there are lots of bits of information on that in all sorts of places. But if you let Juliet and Richard know that you can't find it in anywhere, I'm sure we can provide you with some extra information on that. If you've got a specific question or if you've got a specific site in mind, do let us know and we can see if we can help with some bit of bespoke guidance.
Okay, thanks, John. We're going to let you take a breather and we're going to look at some ideas for back in the classroom.
And I'm going to stay here, Jules. But if it starts to rain in the next 5 minutes, I may have to run and swap computers. Yeah, but for the moment it's dry. It just feels like it's coming.
Fingers crossed. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now. So back in the classroom. So first of all, it's gathering seeds, as John has shown. It's really easy and really fun. It's a really practical lesson that you can do with your class, and it's a brilliant way to connect them with their local trees and learn about local trees. So first of all, a great lesson when you go out. If you have a look on our website, we've got the resources. There's a lesson activity for each of the gather or collect, process and stratify, and an accompanying presentation with that. So that's got lots of ideas and information on that. And in the first one is IDing the trees. So when you're out gathering your seeds, ID the tree. That's a great lesson for the students, and it's really practical and in the moment. You've got to ID the tree and work out what seed it is. Of course, seed dispersal, brilliant. We talked a little bit about winged seeds being amazing experiments for seed dispersals. How far can the helicopters fly? Can you design a better way to disperse the seed? Looking at seed gathering is a brilliant way to observe seasonal changes in your school grounds. Doing other science lessons like food chains or fact files about the trees. Life cycles. I loved this idea from, I think it's Llanmartin in Wales. They did life cycles of a tree, but with stop motion animation. So just another way to present your ideas and the children to present their learning in a bit more of an exciting way. Labeling parts of the trees, looking at food chains even. So the squirrel's eating the nuts there. What would eat the squirrel? Looking at those things like that. Art, you could do sculptures, sketching, tree rubbing, bark rubbing. There's loads of ideas there. Of course, it links really nicely with English. You could do instruction writing. You could get creative and write a story about the seed. Maybe the seed comes alive. What's the seed's journey? There's so many different ideas of what you could do back in the classroom. So yeah, have fun and get creative with it. It's a really lovely activity to do with students. Now we've got our Force for Nature tree seed totalizer. So what we want to do is we want to see how many seeds are being gathered across the UK. So when you've gathered your seeds, please do go and have a look and enter your details here. So tell us your school, what seeds you collected, how many you collected. And on the website, if you need help IDing the tree seeds, there's loads of guides there to help you. So we want you to add your data to the Force for Nature tree seed totalizer and see how many tree seeds we can collect as a whole. Of course, share your journey. Get your local newspaper involved. It's a really lovely activity. Share seed gathering with your parents and your families on your website, in your newsletters. And please make sure you hashtag Force for Nature when you're sharing your photos on social media. And also we've got our seed gathering hashtag, seed gathering season. So please do share lots of photos to inspire other schools to get involved. And I'm going to pass you over to Richard to tell you a little bit more about what we've got coming up this year.
Yeah, fantastic. So I've learned so much just listening to you, John, a really inspiring session. So thank you. And stay dry, which is even better. There are other apps as well. Try Treezilla. That's a really good one. A great way of working out your carbon capture from the trees in your school grounds, and then you plot them and post them online, and you can see the trees, and you can work out the value of those trees, which is really interesting. Certainly, if you're doing climate science or exploring outdoor places, local spaces for geography at secondary levels. So yeah, please have a look at that one. iNaturalist is another one. Seek is another one. Really good apps for exploring the wildlife, insects, invertebrates that you might find on trees when you're outdoors collecting your seeds. And what's coming up? Well, lots. So it's just a few days to go. So 8th, I think, is the deadline for expressions of interest for junior ambassadors. That's our Young Tree Champion program, junior ambassadors. And we're looking for children who have a real passion to speak up for the crisis and are really interested in nature and want to share their passion, and love seed gathering, love tree planting, anything it might be. That's a really good way of getting involved. So do apply, go onto the Young Tree Champion website and apply for junior ambassadors. We're creating a COP26 film, and watch out for that. We're going to launch it at the festival, the Scotland Force for Nature Climate Festival, which is coming up on the 1st of November. So yeah, please tune in and sign up to that. That's gone live, I think, or it certainly will be going live. today, yeah, it'll all happening on the 1st of November. And of course, the Orchards for Schools packs are still live. Excuse me. And there's, I think, about 500 or so packs left, lots and lots left. So please apply, and you'll receive fruit. We have varieties of fruit tree, apples, pears, plums, and we also have a selection of variated species of hedgerow as well. So you can apply for 2 packs of hedgerows, and that's 60 whips. So that's a good 10 meters length of hedgerow that you can put into your school grounds. Brilliant for wildlife. Great for fruits as well. There's some crabapple in there, sloan. There's all sorts of fruits in that hedgerow as well. So yeah, do apply for those on our Orchards for Schools page on a Tree Council website. Any more questions?
Well, I should have just said, Richard.
Yeah.
I should have just said, Richard, one of the best things to try is just an apple, because an apple will contain 10 or 12 seeds inside here. And each one of them is unique, because the way apples are, a Granny Smith does not produce a Granny Smith seed. A Cox's does not produce a Cox's. So every one of those apples in there will be unique. And growing apple seeds is a really good way of getting children to connect food to trees. And every tree that they grow will be unique. It could be the best new apple that the world has ever seen. So it becomes, part of a story that's bigger than just the apple. Yeah.
And touching on that, food cycles as well. So food miles, where your food comes from, brilliant for healthy schools. If you're a healthy school, use this as a platform and a vehicle for developing your healthy schools program. Eco schools as well, great for eco schools, doing your year project, doing something around seed gathering, biodiversity, brilliant. So yeah.
So I think we've got time for, shall we do one final question? Are there any particular trees in the UK that we should be focusing on growing?
So that is such a good question. And there are so many ways to answer it. One of the things to do is to have a look at what's natural to your area, because obviously the seeds of the trees that are in your area means that they're adapted to living in your part of the world, which is a good thing. But if you can find really ancient ones in your part of the world, really old oaks or something, then they've not only been adapted to your place, but they've lasted for hundreds, if not longer, hundreds of years, if not longer. So look for the trees that are thriving well in your part of the world, and then look for the oldest of those, because the seeds of those trees are genetically best adapted to living for a long time in your part of the world, and that's really, really important. So the person from Scotland, Fiona in Scotland, some really lovely granny pines that are up there in the Highlands, which is what we call really old Scots pines. Those granny pines are really, really valuable. Really old aspens, to take cuttings of those. Again, it's really good of the seeds. So it's a really good question, and I could literally spend an hour just talking about that one. But basically, find the trees that grow well in your place and look for the oldest one and collect their seeds.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, John. I've learned so much, and hopefully you can now teach your students that knowledge and impart that and inspire them to be a force for nature by gathering their seeds and growing them into trees. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you. And Richard, you jinxed it, because it's just coming on to rain now.
Timing then. And we'll send around the recording and the presentation, so you'll have all of that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Just have to take this computer out of the rain just to be on the safe side. Are we done? Has everybody gone, or are we?
Is Mandy? Hi, Mandy. Oh, Mandy's gone. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, John. That was great. And sorry you missed your daughter's call. You'll have to call her back now.
I'll call her back now. Was that what you wanted?
That was brilliant. Yeah, really great.
Yeah,
there seemed to be enough questions to mean that they were engaged with it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
We'll stop the recording.
Yeah.
How do you stop the recording?